The Ice Entertainer!
What's up, fiends? I'm Ice Entertainer, and welcome to Behind the Seams, the first video in a series of hopefully many. Today I'm taking you through the process of making my Rapunzel costume. I completed this costume in July of 2023, and it was my first costume I ever created with competition as its primary focus. It wasn't my first Rapunzel cosplay, so I already knew aspects of previous costumes I liked and disliked. I spent a while gathering fabrics and was off to a strong start. Hey, it's me. I'm making a new Rapunzel. I'll bring you over here so you can see. The double tap into switch doesn't work. That's great. I just took a screenshot of myself. First, let's take a look at the most time-consuming part, the skirt. Twirling is very important to me and is a key factor in my skirt construction. Rapunzel's is a circle skirt and has 3 layers of fabric. I wanted to get to embroidering as soon as possible since it takes a million years, so I started with the top part of the skirt. This is the fabric I have chosen. It reminds me of a Barbie from like 2003. I just pinned it and I'm going to sew it, and then once I sew it I'm going to iron it, and once I iron it I'm going to put it into the embroidery machine over there. I cut the panels, pinned them, sewed them, hemmed them, and immediately got that girl to the embroidery machine. I'll link the embroidery patterns I use in the description. Now, embroidery is a very time-consuming process. I can only embroider one 5x7 chunk of the design at a time, and the hem of the skirt is something like 21 feet in total. And I need to iron on interfacing for each one, so it takes a pretty damn long time. Luckily, it gives me an opportunity to make the other 2 layers of the skirt. Circle skirts are pretty simple to make. I roll out the fabric to make sure it's as even as possible and get to measuring. You see, circle skirt math is the only math I can do. I make periodic marks on the fabric to help me guide when I cut. It would be a good idea to use fabric chalk for this, but I don't. Don't be like me. Then it's time to pin the panels together. You can already start to see the circles start to take shape. I pin the sides together and keep part of the back seam open as a spot for the zipper. Once I sewed that, I unleash the full circle upon my floor to start hemming. I use a fold over hem, which is basically just folding the fabric over twice. Now, I wanted to keep this hem clean with only 1 line of stitching, so I also pinned the lace all around the circumference. That way, whenever I stitched the hem, it would also stitch the lace to it at the same time. Hemming is my least favorite part of making skirts, and because I hate myself, I had to do it with 2 layers of this skirt. Luckily, the middle layer doesn't need to be hemmed, but it presented its own challenge. That challenge, of course, being sequins. God, I will be finding sequin shards for the rest of my life. And no, I still haven't learned my lesson, and I'll probably do it again. Anyway, the same process as the other skirt. I lay the fabric out, measure out my circle, and get to cutting. Of course, since it's tulle, I lose my spot, and you can see just how close I get to ruining everything. But I triumph! And sew that bastard. 2 of the layers are essentially done, but we still get to deal with the embroidered top layer. By this time, I guess it was done. I don't know, this was months ago. I assume the timing worked out. But alas, I am still cursed with more work. Now I get to remove all the interfacing and press the whole damn thing to try and get it to be flat and clean. I fail, but it's close enough. However, it is looking pretty good if I say so myself. I trimmed the threads at the very end of the costume making process, so don't worry there. Now, this would be perfectly fine and dandy, but I really wanted this costume to sparkle under the stage lights. I once again go around the hem of the top layer, this time with a sequin trim. At this point, you'll have to forgive me, but I forgot to record some bits, like making the waistband and installing the elastic and zipper. However, I did my best to only attach the 3 layers where the zipper was installed. That way, they can all flow independently for the twirls. I could have stopped here and been fine, but I had Jenna Marbles possess me with her.
Too much, Jean.
So, remember those scraps in the tulle layer? I went to work cutting out individual flowers from it, so I could scatter them around the hem of the skirt. I played with the positioning and the pinning of each of them, knowing I had cursed myself to a future of teeny stitches and thread cutting. And oh, I did. Sewing each one of them at the machine took a total of 40 minutes, which doesn't sound like a long time now that I'm saying it out loud, but God, it felt like it. I still had one more detail in mind though, so I completed the skirt by hand placing hotfix crystals just to give it a hint of even more sparkle. With that, however, the skirt was completed! It took many hours, but she had movement and texture and sparkle. I was happy. But we're not done with this costume. We need a top part. I made the bodice in all sorts of parts, so this is going to be kind of cobbled together video-wise. As always, we start with the fabric. Much like the skirt, the bodice is in 3 layers. Since the bodice uses much less fabric than the skirt and also needs to be lined, I just layered all my fabrics on top of each other, making sure the folds were as even as possible. This way, hopefully, the lining would match up. I used the pattern Simplicity S9166 as a base for the bodice. As a big boobed individual, I've collected patterns over the years that flatter and support me best. I modified the pattern to have a longer torso length as well as become a lace-up bodice. Now, fair warning, I'm not a professional seamstress, so don't come at me for the way I put stuff together. I pinned and sewed the tulle and the cotton together to make assembly easier. As you can see, I basically have to make 2 of the bodice structure, 1 of the front-facing fabrics and 1 of the lining. I pin and sew and press the seams with an iron. Once the shoulder seams are done, you can kind of see it start to take shape. Now, I make my bodices in a weird way, so at this point, I start with the neckline. No, the pieces aren't even assembled. I have like 4 halves of 2 bodices. Trust me on this. I want the neckline to be clean and only have 1 stitching line, so I start prepping the lining and front pieces to be French seamed together. I pin my lace in between the layers so that it's sort of sandwiched inside the French seam, and then I sew. The lining and the front pieces have officially made contact. I start French hemming the bottom of the pieces before full construction as well in order to make the boning channels. Basically, I intend to make the boning channels with the hem already in place so that I can just seam rip the sections where the boning is inserted before stitching it up again. For the channels, I pin where I want them to be in order to keep the fabric flat together. I then just sew 2 parallel stitches from the top of the bodice to the bottom, and that's where I'll slide in the boning later. I also struggled and installed 3/8 inch pink grommets on the 2 front edges. So, now that the 2 halves of the bodice are attached at the shoulders and more or less hemmed at the bottom, we take a quick break for my favorite bit, the sleeves. I love a good puff sleeve, and I like to think I've made a perfect puff sleeve at least for myself. I use the pattern Simplicity 8476 and layer it on top of Simplicity S9006. First, I have to get the top layer show ready. I have some pretty sparkly ribbon and I pin it to the sleeve in just eyeballed increments. It was close enough, it's fine. Now, the bottom layer is smaller than the top layer, so I just pin and scrunch to get it to fit in the same space, taking care to make sure the ribbons are still exposed and pretty and outside of the pleats. I got that stitched up and attached it to a small band of fabric so that it can wrap around my arm, still pleating where needed. And holy shit, it's the bodice! Shh, though. It's not the star right now. I'm just attaching the sleeves to the bodice halves and adding some elastic to the sleeve band while it's still flat. This is so I can close up both the sleeve and the bodice in 1 stitch and make sure the armpit seams match. My mom taught me that. Shout out to my mom. Sorry, I swear in videos. I stitched that up and voila, the 2 become 1. Now we have 2 definitive halves to the bodice. It all comes down to putting them together. But first, more boning channels, just to add some support. And remember how I said I forgot to record some things? That would also be right here, where I installed the boning and closed it all up, carefully stitching on top of the original bottom hem and adding lace. And made a center panel, but that's okay, it's just like a rectangle that I put boning in, it's fine. It was at this point I realized the bodice was a little too small, but that's nothing I can't handle. There you go. Hello and welcome to my sewing machine. It actually gave me the opportunity to make a back panel for the zipper. I made 2 rectangles to match the rest of the bodice and installed a separating zipper between them. I just sewed them together, pinned the zipper on the seam, straight stitch each side, and then seam rip the original seam to reveal the zipper. With that, it's easy to just attach them to the back edges of the bodice halves. And so it should be finished, right? Aw, geez, I made it too big now. Haha! It is merely a trick! Now it is time for my secret weapon, the laziest lace-up back you've ever seen. I just pinned some ribbon in a zigzag and straight stitch it right down the middle. Boom! You got a lace-up back too. Tight like a shoe to make the bodice cinch. We're done, right? No. There's still one more thing before the costume is complete, the undershirt. I chose stretch fabric, even though working with stretch fabric is definitely one of the circles of hell, and for my hellish sentence, I chose a two-way stretch iridescent fabric and used the pattern McCall's 7313. I used a single fold over hem for the bottom of the sleeves and added white lace, same pinning technique as always to get it all done in one stitch. I also added some stretch lace detailing with some trim from my hoard. It has beading on it, and I sewed it to a stretch fabric. Beading and stretch don't really go together, but I did it. I did it, goddammit. I didn't record it, but I attached it to 4-way stretch beige fabric for the undershirt base. Somehow it was the simplest, but one of the most challenging parts of the costume. With that, however, it is time for the most joyous time, watching it all come together. I made some hairpins with flowers and hot glue and got to enjoy watching everything I created come together in a beautiful vision. I worked very hard on this costume and learned a lot competing with it. I bought the wig instead of making it, which is not recommended if you're going to compete, but you honestly couldn't pay me enough to make this wig myself. Overall though, I'm so happy with her. I made every stitch and seam as clean as I could, mock serged it, and I'm so in love with her movement and sparkle. Thanks for chilling here with me today, and let me know what you'd like to see for future costume making videos. Do you want more details to some pieces of the process? Let me know in the comments, and I'll be reading, watching, and learning for my next big project. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time.